Finance Ministry has asked the public sector banks to draw up a campaign for a one-time clean-up strategy for cleaning over 1 lakh bad loan recovery cases pending in debt recovery tribunals. According to banking sources, there are over 2 lakh cases pending with debt recovery tribunals, of which 1.5 lakh are original applications for over 12 lakh crore exposure. The proposal is to have a scheme for cases of low claim value where the dispute is straightforward and parties are likely to opt for settlement. With us on the broadcast is Akash Jindal, a senior economist. Thank you so much, Mr. Jindal, for speaking with us early this morning. Sir, bad loans recovery, banks are all set to be making a strategy. What all needs to be thought of, sir, before we in fact even think about implementing a strategy such as this?
I think you have put the question very nicely. There are two angles to this. One is it's a positive thing that ultimately banks are going for settlement, because if the banks go for settlement, see, basically these are bad loans, perhaps NPAs. So what is happening is, if the settlement is done, banks would get the much required funds which banking needs. For a bank, money, funds are like raw material, because bank has to do lending. That's the bank's prime business. For lending, they need money. So the positive angle of settlement is that banks would have money. Second angle is, generally all those people who would have borrowed, perhaps for businesses, their businesses are not running or perhaps not viable. So it's perhaps difficult for them to pay interest on that. So if settlements happen in a good way, that banks get principal and some amount of interest, I think it's a good angle. Now what needs to be seen is that the settlements are done such way that banks are able to recover a maximum component of what the borrowers owe the bank. So my organization, Akash Jindal, feels that it's a positive thing, but it has to be done with great care and great caution, that banks are able to recover a huge component of what they have lent. Now the other angle to this is the amount of this NPAs or bad loans is huge, whopping. So now the issue comes, how come that so many bad loans were given? How come that so many loans turned bad? Because we are talking about PSU banks, public sector banks, whose money it is. Generally, it's the government which recapitalizes these banks. And the government, it's taxpayers' money. Who pays the taxes? Taxes paid by a brother of mine who is a rickshaw puller, who toils in Delhi summer in May and June, earns 500 rupees during the day, buys a 5 rupee biscuit packet, and then so many taxes on that 5 rupees biscuit packet. Or a part-time maid sister of mine who would work in 10 houses, earn some money, buy 4 samosas with that money, and the samosa person would have paid taxes on the oil, on the gas. So ultimately, a scrutiny needs to be done. My suggestion is, the suggestion of my organization, Akash Jindal, is that a scrutiny needs to be done, that why so many bank loans which were given by the banks have turned bad, because it is the money of a rickshaw puller, of a part-time maid who have toiled 12 hours, 14 hours during the day to pay taxes to the government. A scrutiny needs to be done. How come so much of loans have turned bad? Because see, if a small, minuscule percentage of loans would have turned bad, it's understandable, because in any business, there are some delinquencies, but a huge component turning bad. If a huge component has turned bad, there are questions. So I think there needs to be a serious scrutiny. Third angle is that now on, there should be change in how banks lend. The suggestion of my organization, akashjindal.in, is that any loan which any PSU bank gives, there should be a contingency report. What do I mean by contingency report is that tomorrow, if the loan turns bad, how would the bank recover its money? The best way is that there should be a collateral which the bank can encash anytime. See, generally certain loans were given on the basis of reputation, goodwill, or plant and machinery. Now, if a business has turned bad, so we very well know that where would be the reputation of goodwill. So because of goodwill, perhaps you won't be able to recover the money. Secondly, plant and machinery also, if after 6 years the borrower doesn't pay the money, the plant and machinery could have turned obsolete, it could have depreciated. So by selling that, would the bank be able to raise money? I think it's the real estate which the bank should have pledged. Had the bank pledged real estate, it could have sold off and recovered that money. So there should be a contingency report in case there's a default. This is how the bank is going to recover the money, because the bank's money, as we have discussed, ultimately is the money of the common man of this country, and that money is very precious. So I think this needs to be taken care in all the loans, whether small or big, which have to be sanctioned in future. We already know that there have been some cases wherein people, I mean, big people, they borrowed huge amounts of money in India and they left India. Now our banks, they are finding it difficult to recover the money from there. We already seen how many news items have appeared. I myself have participated in so many shows. So I think loan disbursals now onwards need to be done with lot of caution, and this contingency report should be there. The prime factor while sanctioning and disbursing a loan should be that in case that loan turns bad, how would that banker recover that money? That should be the prime most focus prior to sanctioning or disbursing any loan. As of now, I think if we come back to settlements, if settlements are done in a proper manner, that the bank is recovered to able to recover a significant component of the money it has lent, I think it's okay, because ultimately, with a lot of respect and due regards to courts and tribunals in the country, litigation is a long drawn process. So if settlements are done in a proper way, which are beneficial to banks, where the terms are something which suit the banks, I think it's a okay thing.
All right, Mr. Jindal, some numbers, sir. There are some 1 lakh bad loan recovery cases that are still pending with, debt recovery tribunals. We've also been given to understand that the ministry is now saying there should be some alternate platforms that should be used to, to resolve these disputes, such as Lokh Adalats, etc. Now, you've said that normally litigation takes a really long time. In order to actually implement this one-time cleanup strategy, how long do you think it's going to take the government to even come up with a plan, for the banks to rather come up with a plan and then eventually get rid of these bad loans that exist right now?
I think it's a very nice and practical question which you have asked. Yes. Now if the settlements have to be done, that also needs to be done quickly, because the bankers, they need to get in touch with the borrowers quickly. Then they have to draw up a strategy and come up with a resolution plan quickly. Of course, for the finalization, or ultimately clearing it up, Lokh Adalats could be used, but ultimately the bankers need to talk to the borrowers and they should finalize things. There also, the bankers need to be very active. I think they need to be proactive on this part. Then only things can be done. And ultimately, the borrowers also should understand this thing, that ultimately, end of the day, they are liable to pay. They should also have a positive mindset to somehow square up, or somehow ultimately do a deal, so that ultimately it's settled. So I think firstly, a proactive attitude, fast attitude, and attempt to expedite it from both the bankers as well as the borrowers is very important, because borrowers also need to understand that if the end of the day they do not pay the bank's loan, ultimately they may have a bad civil name, bad civil record, and they may not get any loan in future. So banks have to be proactive in communicating everything to the borrowers, plus actively tying up with the borrowers, and ultimately squaring off, or ultimately making deals with the borrowers, that things are squared off quickly. Because ultimately what would happen is, the positive angle behind this entire story is that banks would get money, banks would get funds, and funds are like a raw material for the banks, because bank is ultimately end of the day, it's a business entity. The business entity would make money only when it lends money. For lending money, you need to have money. So I think if things are done positively, in short term, it's an okay thing. But in future, I would suggest banks to be very, very cautious while lending the money. And prime focus should be on how to recover that money end of the day, if it converts into, or if it becomes a bad loan.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.